Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast, the podcast that is passing wisdom to the next generation of athletes, coaches, and parents to transform leaders on and off the court. And in today's episode, we have a very special guest, Coach Nikki. Nikki helps athlete-minded women to stop overworking and burning themselves out by coming back into alignment with their bodies, their desires, and the unique gifts they have to offer the world. She teaches them how to shift their subconscious beliefs and master the energetics of wealth, fulfillment, and freedom so they can make a greater impact on this world with their leadership. In our conversation today, we dive all into that, talking about leadership, creating an organization and an environment that encourages self-belief and so much more. This is not only for women, this is a great podcast for all people that are listening and want to make a greater impact on the next generation of leaders. So without further ado, let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Bridging Impact Podcast. Nikki, I am thrilled to have you on. You are our first swimmer that we have had on the show, at least collegiate swimmer. Who knows how many other of our guests swim for fun, but welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We are a rare breed, us swimmers, so do things a little differently.
There we go. There's going to be a lot of gems then. So with that, we always start with a very easy softball question of what or how has swimming made an impact on your life?
Yeah, an easy question.
Yeah, super easy.
But yeah, I started swimming back when really full time when I was 11 or 12 years old. And it's just been a platform, I would say, to expand myself and what's possible for me. I ended up swimming in college, but in high school, I had a spinal fusion for scoliosis, and I had a lot of doctors that told me that I would never swim again. Or that I wouldn't swim at the level that I was at. And so I had a goal to swim in college, and ended up being able to swim at Kenyon College Division III. I was an 11-time All-American, but had a lot of just obstacles dealing with my back and my spine, and having to navigate through that and do things differently. And so especially in my senior year of college, I really worked on the visualization, the belief work, being in appreciation and gratitude for my sport. I love swimming so much, and I grew so much as a person throughout high school and then college. And I just had really supportive coaches that challenged me. I met lifelong friends in college, really grateful for them, but that journey made me want to go into coaching as a collegiate coach. So then I left being an athlete, became a college coach right after college. I just loved learning. So I got master's degrees in sports psychology and kinesiology. And then I also studied organizational dynamics. So kind of blending, like, how does individual motivation happen and occur, and how do I motivate individuals, but then also how does the culture impact that? And I got to coach at almost every level. I started in Division III at Johns Hopkins, then I coached at Penn in the Ivy League, which was kind of the middle tier, and then I coached at Michigan for a few years. So I was just always learning and thinking about those things, and swimming just was always my platform to learn more about myself, and to be the leader that I wanted to be, and to also think about, like, okay, this doesn't work in an environment. This is not who I want to be as a leader. This is not what sports are about to me. So it was quite the journey. And I started my own life coaching business about 2 years ago. And I work with a lot of former athletes and coaches that are still in sport. So there it is.
Awesome. I mean, there's so much we can go into there. I have so many follow-up questions, but one of the things that, caught me, not necessarily off guard, but just like struck me is, what you're talking about at the beginning is swimming was a way for you to expand yourself and see what's possible. And I think that's one of the amazing things about sports, as you talked about, the growth that you experienced as a leader, as a person, the connections you made, the transition you made from, player to coach, and what comes with that. And then, so when you're thinking about expanding yourself and seeing what's possible for you as a coach, now as a life coach, and also before, as a collegiate coach, one of our responsibilities as a coach and for the parents listening are to expand, what athletes or your clients think is possible within themselves. Can you expand a little bit more about what that means to you?
Yeah, I love that question. It's one of my favorite things to talk about with the clients that I work with and some of the teams that I've worked with as well. But I came up with this idea of expansive discomfort versus forced discomfort. And I think that when we think about possibility, when we think about overcoming our limitations, we're in expansive discomfort. And when we can be grounded in ourselves and our values and we can find joy in that journey, it's still going to be uncomfortable, because I think sometimes we want to avoid that discomfort, and it's realizing that the reward and the fulfillment does come from expanding ourselves, but being really anchored in our own self-worth, knowing who we are outside of outcomes and achievements. And that's when I think the discomfort can be expansive and you can step into that next level of what is possible for you and really overcome yourself. But I think when we get into forced discomfort, it comes more from like forcing ourselves to try to do something to gain validation or approval, and not necessarily being grounded in ourselves and our values. And so I think when we take action from that sort of energy of like, I need to prove myself, it's uncomfortable, but then over the long term, it's not as sustainable. It can create burnout. And I don't think that's as much connected with finding the best in yourself. It's more about like, let me try to prove myself so that I can be enough for other people.
Okay, so we're thinking about outside achievements. You're thinking about some of the opportunities that come with trying to prove oneself to maybe fit in with a group versus maybe that internal values and personal validation that we have. I'm curious, as you have got the opportunity to work with, athletes probably from all different sports now, what kind of questions do you what do you ask in terms of like, how do you help athletes find their internal values and things that they want to continue to work on and strive for? That's that internal discomfort versus, like the external likes and social media and the outstanding achievements that, sometimes can get in the way of the internal.
Yeah, I think we can start by just looking actually to what do I admire in other people? Like, what do I admire in other coaches and how they lead, and how does that make me feel? And just coming back to creating our value system around that. Like, if someone has empathy or they spend time with their family outside of sport, or thinking about like, what is the lifestyle that I want to have? Making sure that our achievements are not just for the sake of having achievements, but also like, what does the rest of my life look like? And so an exercise I'll do is like, what are coming back to your five top values and understanding, okay, let me understand what are the things that I love that other people do or don't do, and experiences too. Like, what do I love about experiences that I've had, or what do I not like about experiences that I've had, and what is that teaching me about what I value? And I believe that every single experience that we have is on purpose. It's actually helping us find ourselves and be more authentic to who we are. And I think that's really important in sport, because a lot of times we will be trying to like fit into certain environments where it's like, we were never meant to really fit into that environment. And so it is important to just come back again to like, what are my top 5 values? And then what does that look like in terms of my lifestyle, in terms of my habits, my self-care, in terms of how I spend my time, my relationships, the people that I'm around, and just kind of creating a vision for your life, from kind of your values as your directional guide points for that.
Yeah, I love that. Having those values that do direct you and create that clarity around, those internal, achievements that you value, right? It's not like achievements are a bad thing, right? It's just like as long as it comes from within. But I think one thing that you brought up earlier and you just mentioned again is one of the things that you learned in your journey and that I've learned is how not to lead, and what's not authentic to ourselves. So could you expand more on how important how not to lead is an important part of the journey to learn how to lead?
Yeah. I mean, I've had all sorts of coaches throughout my journey. I've worked for a lot of different bosses, and, um, I think sometimes we can get really stuck on coaches that rub us the wrong way, or we're like, that's not how I would do it. And it's, instead of getting so stuck on it, using it as a lesson. And I think any sort of failure, just reframing it as a lesson, like, what does this teach me about what's important for me and how I want to show up, how I want to treat others, how I want to connect with, if I'm an athlete, with my teammates, with my coaches, if I'm a coach, how I want to lead my athletes. And so I think when we can sit with processing, I always talk about processing our emotions, but if we're angry or frustrated, or we have past grievances with a coach or a boss or a mentor, really being able to feel those emotions, to have compassion for ourselves, to realize, like, yeah, sometimes we're not going to agree with that. And then really tuning back into ourselves and realizing, like, that's teaching us what is important, and then asking, how can I be that change, how can I integrate this into what I don't want to do, and really what I do want to stand for. I've even gone through this in the past couple of weeks in my own coaching spaces, not in athletics, but just how I see certain leaders showing up where there can be a lot of ego. And I just really believe in coming from a place of service and love and connection. And not everyone's going to lead that way. And it doesn't serve me to get stuck in the thought loop about it or be angry or frustrated about it. It's like, okay, well, I'm just going to do it this way and make the impact in the way that I want to have it.
Yeah, 1,000%. I mean, I feel the exact same way, right? Like where, and I feel like sometimes even in terms of our judgment, at least I know for me, I can only speak for personal experience, but I do my best to strive and lead with love and service and connecting with others versus, being an authority and talking down and speaking down to players and coming from my way and you're going to buy into my way, right? Versus when I work with other coaches, maybe sometimes that are, kind of, doing things the latter, I judge them, right? But instead, like you're kind of talking about how we can use these experiences as learning opportunities, to really like further, kind of solidify our values. And I'm curious, what have you seen, how have you seen, coaching through like love, service, and connection work? Is there any short stories you can share, about coaching within that methodology?
Yeah, I think you can still be really tough on your athletes when it is coming from love. And um my experience is that I had coaches that were tough on me in college, but it was just always about finding the best in yourself. um and I think in my first coaching experience, like, we really just worked a lot on empowering women, and empowering our athletes to have confidence. I worked really well with my first mentor. His name was George Kennedy. We talked a lot actually last week. We were talking about this, but really how we work together to lift other people up, to help them believe in themselves. And he talked about there were times when so my second year there, we had gone from never winning a NCAA title on the women's side. And my second year there, we won all 5 relays at the NCAA championships. And so much of that was just the belief work. And he really believed in empowering women and just helping them have that confidence in themselves. So what we did was pretty incredible. And it was a lot of fun. We had fun in the process too. And I think after that, there was the next year almost a lot of pressure. Suddenly he was putting a lot of pressure on himself to try to win and repeat that and do it again. And I remember just not feeling, I felt kind of off about it, but I was like 23, 24 years old at the time. And I told him, like, I don't vibe with this. Like, I'm not, I'm not feeling like this is the way we want to go. And it was really powerful because he came back the next day and said, thank you. Like, you're right. I'm coaching people because I'm feeling the pressure to replicate what we did and to win. And so suddenly his coaching had shifted. And that was just a really powerful moment. Like, this is a leader that's listening to feedback. And because of course we're all gonna have those moments where we make mistakes or our ego kind of takes over. But I think after that, and moving up to the higher levels of sport, especially at Michigan, just the constant pressure to win, trying to win Big Tens, put athletes on the Olympic team, trying to be at the top 3 of the NCAA championships. Like, there was so much pressure all of the time. And I remember telling them that story about what had happened when I coached in Division III and how we got us to winning all the titles at the NCAA level. And the response I got was, but this is Division I. This isn't Division III. And it was probably my first couple of months coaching at Michigan. And I just remember thinking, like, but humans are humans. Like, how you motivate them is the same. And I think it's just when you're in that environment of so much pressure to try to do something as a coach, and it's like everyone's looking at you, your salary, your job is on the line because of it. Suddenly you lose sight of like why you're coaching in the first place. So that, I guess, is a story that would encompass all of that. It was interesting.
Yeah, no, that is fascinating because it honestly reminds me of a story and conversations that I had with Coach Tasha, who came on the show, a few episodes ago and shared for UCLA basketball, right? Especially, when you're in a collegiate coach, your job is to win, right? Like, I mean, at the end of the day, so there's a lot of things you can do to try and recruit, and not every way is legal, but there is a right way to win. And I know one of the things that she was talking about is one thing that was really important to their program that stuck out to me is that all the coaches come back and they ask themselves, like, are we living in coaching to our values? Like, I can't remember what they were talking about, teach, equip, and I'm going to maybe inspire or empower, something along that. Did we do that every single day? And just that reminder to the core value, because even with me, like, I know my own experience, like with freshman and sophomore high school basketball, you get into the thick of the season, you lose a game and you're like, how can we win? Right? Like, the competitor comes out, right? The ego, how can we win? I don't want to be embarrassed. I don't want to, probably at the collegiate level, I don't want to lose my job. Right. So, like, but how do we do it within our own core values? And I would love to, kind of ask you about that season that you had, before you, started feeling a lot of pressure. You talked about belief and mindset work. I would love to learn more about that. So, for the coaches and parents that are listening, they can learn more about how they can instill that into their athletes.
Yeah. Well, I think when we understand, a lot of times I think a lot of our action comes from a place of lack of belief. And I think that's why in our society, we end up almost overworking, probably throughout lots of sports. I know swimming is, in my opinion, one of the most overtrained sports. especially during COVID where we were shut down and we could only do so much and people were still going best times. To me, that says like we don't have to train as much. And is something that we just kept coming back to, even at Michigan when we were shut down for a long time during COVID, like the belief that you could still go best time, that you could still perform, because your body is really, your mind and your body are so connected. Your body is your subconscious mind. So whatever thoughts that you're thinking on repeat are kind of the energy, what you're going to create. Our thoughts and our beliefs create our emotions, our energy, and our actions. And so if we're not in belief that something is possible, we're either going to overwork to try to overcompensate for a lack of belief, or not follow through on the things at all. Like not want to do the intentional things that it takes to create the result. And so I think it's something we can do every single day. Come back to what's happening in our mind and body. Like, where am I at? I always start with like, where am I at emotionally right now? When I'm feeling like this isn't possible, it's kind of checking in and being able to process our emotions and either moving that energy through our body, sitting with it, becoming aware of it, and then understanding like what are the beliefs that are connected to each emotion that I'm having. So if we're stuck in fear or worry, and the thoughts that are playing all day is like, I can't do this, or I'm not good enough, or I'll never be able to, or whatever your story is, your actions are going to be a result of that, which is what I said, like either overworking or not following through on the things you need to create success. So it's something you can do every day, is just check in. And then when you create a vision, when you create like, here's your goal, here's what my values are, and based on my values, here's the goal that I set for myself. And I always say that goals are a place to come from, not a place to get to. And so asking yourself, who would I need to be if I were to reach that goal? And what would I need to believe? What would I need to be thinking? Who would I need to be being? How would I interact with myself, with my teammates, with my coaches, with life, if I were the person who had already achieved that goal? And it's kind of inverting our success, where I think in society we've been programmed to believe like we got to work really hard and grind it out to get to a place. And it's not that we don't want to work hard, but we're changing that into like, let me become the person who's created that result first by working on my beliefs. And then by the time I get to the competition, it's been programmed into my body. So now I just have to show up and do everything that I've kind of been programming and believing throughout the journey.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And as a coach, and I'm like getting super excited about this because maybe I've been thinking about goals the wrong way. And because I do know, right, process over outcome. And I haven't really thought about it in a way of like becoming the process to, reach the outcome. And so my question would be, I'm going to give you an example. So I'm going to give you my freshman and sophomore team of young boys who, obviously are still discovering who they are, right? They are, you know, they're trying to fit in, they're trying to be cool, but at the end of the day, it's all like kind of, I don't want to say a front, but like they just want to fit into the group essentially. And I want them to, become the person they want to be to help reach their goals. Right. And talk about team goals and maybe tie this into an earlier question I had about individual motivation and within it and coming together with a team. What's the best place for, myself and other coaches that have similar teams to start with this belief?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think with a lot of the coaches that I've worked with, sometimes they'll come to my calls and they're like frustrated because they're like, my athletes aren't doing what I want them to be doing and they're pissing me off and I can't. And it's like, I think about a lot of things in terms of energy, and that's kind of what becoming the goal is. It's about changing your energy, changing your belief, changing who you're being in that process. And as a coach, the best thing to start from is like, what's the environment that I want to create to allow those athletes to come to practice and feel inspired and feel like they can be themselves, and to encourage them to take the right actions for themselves. And I think the best way to do that is to create the energy, and just to show up with that energy where you make it fun, where you can talk about the goals and it's not from a place of pressure, we have to do this, but like, wouldn't it be fun if we could see what was possible? And I think within that too, helping every single athlete understand like what are their values when they're living out their values, which doesn't have to mean they have to be the best player on the team, but when they're at their best, how are they contributing to the environment? How are they contributing to the overall team goal? And knowing that each person brings something different. We're all gonna bring that unique energy, that unique frequency, and we have to empower our athletes to know that it is safe here for you to be yourself. I'm going to challenge you when you have this goal and maybe you're not following through on that. But yeah, how do we start with like making the culture a place where it is fun, where they buy in, where they want to be there? Because if your athletes want to be there and they're doing it for them, it's a lot easier than trying to control and manipulate people to do what you want them to do, which just never works very well.
Absolutely. So if I walk into a culture like that, an environment, what am I going to see? What am I going to hear? What am I going to feel?
As an athlete?
No, as a coach observing the athletes that are within the environment.
Yeah. I think just athletes that are self-motivated, that want to be there. I think people that are creating a culture where people encourage each other. There's that supportive collaboration. There's the connection that's happening. People are talking. And I think also being okay with having conflict too is important, with teaching people how do we handle emotions? How do we handle when we do experience failure? Like, how do we talk about that? How do we look at like what isn't working and what we want to shift and do better? And I think that comes from, when you create that safe space where people are valued in their humanity and their values, and not by a number or performance, you can have those conversations around like, this is where we fell short. This is what didn't work. Let's have some honest feedback, or even with coaches asking like, what do you think? Like, what do you think that you need to improve, and letting them kind of come up with those solutions for themselves. And it's like, okay, great. Here's where I agree with you. Here's where we're missing something, or like maybe there's a blind spot. But I think a lot of like, it's like a co-creation between the coach and the athlete. It's not power over. It's let's work through this together. Let's problem solve together. Let's make it fun and collaborative. And yeah, just embracing the discomfort and enjoying that journey.
No, that's really powerful. And in terms of like becoming and helping athletes become problem solvers is, one of the most important skills, I feel like, because once they graduate, right, whether it's high school, college, or they get to play professionally, all of us end up having a career after and having to have some sort of problem solving skills. And if coach is always solving the problems, or the parents are always solving the problems, then those athletes, those kids don't get the chance to be leaders and make those, kind of decisions. And one of the things that I would love to kind of expand on, and one thing that I've been thinking about more in terms of when I create environments for athletes at camps, is like making sure they have a safe place to fail. And so I had a conversation with a parent the other day who was challenged with her kid about, he was just having trouble. He really has trouble with failure, and a lot of times once you get to the high school level, they don't want to, students and athletes, they don't want to try to expand, right? It's kind of like the limited mindset, or the fixed mindset. How do you work with coaches and athletes in regards to helping them kind of expand their mind around failure?
Yeah. Well, it can go back to what we were talking about before in terms of the leadership or your values, like understanding what didn't work is actually teaching you what will work. And so failure is just a stepping stone to success. But I think at a deeper level, the thing about failure is that you have to be willing to feel it. And I think we can only evolve, we can only have success to the level at which we're willing to fail. And when I talk to my clients about the nervous system. And so it's like, for every negative emotion we have, we can also experience the opposite of it. So for the despair, the disappointment, the discouragement, like when we're able to experience those emotions and open ourselves up to those emotions, we can also open ourselves up to joy, fulfillment, passion, like all the things we want to feel. But our society has narrowed our ability to feel emotion down to like this much, right? We have so many distractions. It's like, well, if you don't want to feel anything, you don't have to. Here's a cell phone, here's Netflix, here's like whatever thing that you want to distract yourself from actually feeling. You could just numb your entire life out. And so I think that we have to get better at actually feeling emotions. And then what is the self-talk when we experience emotions? Because we also see like, oh, if I'm having a disappointment or a failure, there must be something wrong with me, because we look at everybody else's highlight reel where like everyone's just putting their success out. And then so not only can you, like, you don't want to feel that emotion, but then if you do feel it, you're going to just basically be in that spiral because you're continuing to think like, well, this only happens to me. Everybody else is successful. Like, what's wrong with me? And so just reframing and making it okay. Like, hey, failure is a part of the human experience. You can have success without failure, but then also creating more safety in the body to actually like feel it. It's really just an emotion. When we think about what failure is, it's how do I slow down? How do I breathe into disappointment? Because if we can trust ourselves to feel disappointed and realize like, I'm not going to die. My brain thinks I'm going to die, but I'm not actually going to die. It's just something that I have to experience, and we open ourselves up to it. We can move ourselves through that. It's like, okay, I failed. Now what did I learn, and how am I going to continue moving forward?
That's a really good point. And I think, obviously there's no success without failure, but I think the greater point is if you want to, let's say, play at a high level, whatever sport it may be, you have to be willing to fail at that high level. Otherwise, you won't reach there and you won't be able to get those stepping stones. And it's a place where you can kind of figure out who you are and almost of what you're made of. And you realize, like when your brain tells you you're going to die and you realize, after you get your butt kicked, you're still alive and, you
Still
still
here.
love still love your sport and just continue to, move forward. I think that's something that's really obviously great about sports. And with that, what do you think, in your opinion, is the most important aspect for coaches to really like help them step into, creating an environment that, reminding them that failure is a part of success? Because I think sometimes, like we kind of mentioned earlier in the podcast, that we can get caught up in the victories or in wanting to get victories, stack victories, especially when we've lost 3 or 4 games in a row.
Yeah, I think we have to let our athletes fail, and help them learn, help them like, let's pick that apart. Let's see what happened. And I think a part of it too is how do you build momentum on the other side? Like, how do you start we talked about building confidence, but it's like the little things, because even within every game that's lost, it's like there's still some things that you did well there. And so how do we not just see it as like, oh, we lost the game, it's a total fail, like that sucked, let's just not look at it. And that's what a lot of times what happens is we just don't want to look at it because we don't want to sit in the feelings of it and we don't want to acknowledge it. But like there's actually probably a lot that goes well when we're failing. And so can we pick pieces of it that actually were a success and continue to build that momentum and use that as energy to propel ourselves forward? But I think the most important thing for coaches and for parents is like we have to actually let people fail and experience it. That was one of the crazy things of coaching in the Power Five is like you had every single safety net. It's like you have someone that follows you around and makes sure you go to class, you don't fail out of school. Like you finish your race, we hand you a towel. We travel to a meet, you get off the plane, you get a sandwich. Like you don't have to take your food. You forget your suit, oh, someone hands you a suit. It's like there are systems in place so that you literally could not fail. And I really reflected on that. I'm like, this is not setting people up for life post sport, because every single thing in your life is taken care of. And I think that's amazing. It's amazing that we can support people in that way. But at the same time, the other side of that is there's so much of a safety net that we can't experience failure. We can't actually learn the lesson of, oh, I forgot my suit at home, I should probably prepare better and bring a suit the next time. I didn't bring the food that I needed, or I didn't bring what I needed to support my performance. I should probably figure that out for myself the next time, instead of, making sure that we don't mess anything up or we try to do it perfectly.
Wow, that's a really good point, and really pivotal, especially for the parents, right? Like if your kid forgets their uniform or forgets their lunch, and it was their responsibility, maybe don't bring it to them, because maybe the next day they're going to actually learn that lesson versus, teaching them that, hey, the lunch is always going to come no matter what, so I don't really need to bring it, right? And that may be an oversimplification of it, but those do have ramifications as we go on as leaders and taking responsibility for our own, mistakes. And it's okay. We all make mistakes. I always, tell my athletes I make mistakes when I make substitutions and, run the wrong drill, right? But that's just like, we have to learn from it and kind of move on. And one of the things, the last, kind of ending towards the end of our podcast is you talked about feelings and letting ourselves feel our feelings and getting back to that. I think especially as, a male coach who works with male athletes, like, and this may be sort of a systemic question, right? But what is like feeling our feelings look like? Because it is so easy to just go when I'm tired or when I I feel off. I'm like, Instagram, right? Like I feel uncomfortable. Like I don't want to, I'm bored, but it's so important for us to sit with those feelings. So kind of what does that look like to handle those feelings in a healthy way?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important for both men and women, probably men even more so, because there's, I think, more of a stigma around it. But I think so many people just end up struggling on their own, not having the tools to talk about feelings. And again, I think that it comes from this fear around emotions. Like there's so much, I've talked to different people in leadership development at higher level schools where they're like, oh no, you can't talk to them about feelings or emotions. And it's like, with what I do, I think that, yeah, there's a space for trauma and PTSD and like getting the proper support, but there also is just being safe in your emotions, like being able to cry, being able to express. And so I think a lot of times our emotions are so unprocessed because we do have so many distractions. So, it's like instead of feeling the sadness of a game or the sadness of anything in your life, a breakup or something that's hard in your personal life, what do we go to is like the numbing resources, and we press all of these emotions down. And so they're just kind of stored in our body. And then the body can be in fight or flight because of it. Like we're totally dysregulated. We're not able to be present. And a lot of the overthinking loops that we're stuck in, I find, are a result of under feeling. Like overthinking is a lack of feeling because the brain's trying to keep you safe from that emotion. And so finding a way to process that with ourselves, just, sometimes you could take your phone out. Maybe don't take your phone out because we're trying to use that less, but just recording a voice memo to yourself, like talking out loud about how you're feeling, journaling it out in a journal, like what's happening. I'm feeling really frustrated because this happened. And the first part, I think, is just really validating how we're feeling, like not making ourselves wrong or trying to fix it, just being in it before we try to shift anything, before we try to change our thoughts about it. But also just developing, like I use meditation practice, mindfulness practices, training our nervous system to calm down and to be present and to come back to our breath. When we're breathing and we learn how to breathe again, which is like through our diaphragm, really, a lot of us we're like all day breathing wrong, creating stress. So just really learning how to breathe again. So something simple is like the box breath, which you breathe in through your nose for 4, you hold for 4, you exhale for 4, hold for 4. And the Navy SEALs use this. A lot of NFL players use this to just bring your nervous system back from that sympathetic activation, which will actually slow your thoughts down. So yeah, there's a lot of tools that you can use, but really just slowing things down, creating safety in the body, being able to process what's happening, even communicating it with a friend, being able to reach out and ask for help, which I think a lot of athletes, we don't like to do that because we like to be tough and do things on our own. But having the courage to say, hey, I'm struggling and I just want to talk about a few things. So
that's so important. And I really appreciate you sharing all of this wisdom. And I hope everyone that's listening is taking down a ton of notes, because I know I have. And in terms of, letting our just processing, sometimes we just need to slow down. And I think as I heard you, talking, I saw myself, because I'm a reflective person and I'm an overthinker as well. And I recognized, I don't know, maybe 6 months, a year ago, that a lot of times my overthinking is, a result of me like feeling uncomfortable about something else. So I had to like really start like digging in and, having different conversations, whether it's with myself when I was journaling or, with other people. I think it's so imperative to create that space and, create that space as coaches. And in our last, part of our, conversation, do you have any like last, words of advice and thoughts you have for, the parents and coaches that are listening that want to develop the most conscious and impactful leaders that they can once, athletes finish their playing career?
Yeah. Well, I think, I'll just end it with what we were talking about and really taking that intentional time, even if you don't have an hour, like take what you have. I was working with a coach earlier today, and she's a head coach and a mom. And it's like, okay, well, there are moments where you can find presence. So what are those moments? Even if it's just 10 minutes after your morning workout with your team to slow down and connect back in with yourself before you're rushing off back home with your kids. And so to be a leader, and I think with everything we've been talking about, to not lead from ego, to not just be on those reactionary cycles, it's important to create that intentional space. And so how can you put that on the calendar for you, if you're a coach, or for your team, or if you're a parent, to have that time with your kids? I work also with a mom of competitive athletes, and they have kind of like a no phone rule for it's like, okay, you can use your phone at this time, and then for these hours before bed, we're turning off our electronics. And so just creating that intentionality where we can be more present with ourselves and not so distracted is really important.
Yeah, I like to think about like being present as like present is the gift, right? This moment in itself is the gift, even though sometimes it may be challenging moments, it may be, uncomfortable, but it is a gift, right? Because we get this opportunity to live life right now in this present moment, not in our thoughts. And so, as you obviously shared so much wisdom, I would love, for you to, share your, where people can find you and connect with you and reach out, even if they, want to learn more about what you're doing and get the potential opportunity to work with you.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. This has been a great conversation. And the best way to find me is typically on Instagram at Nikki Kett Coaching. I have a free Facebook group where I just am doing some weekly trainings on this stuff. And then I offer one-on-one coaching and a group coaching program for, say, athlete-minded leaders as well. So that's kind of what I have at the moment.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on this show. I really appreciate your time. And again, tons of wisdom you just dropped there. So if you all have to go and re-listen to this, hey, that's what you got to do. Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast. We'd love it if you would like, subscribe, leave a comment and a review on whatever platform you're on. It's the best way to help us grow. We appreciate you for doing that. We'll shout you out on social media. I'd also love if you connected with me on social media. Let me know your thoughts. And this is why I do it. I want to share knowledge and wisdom from experienced leaders to people like yourself and myself, so we can have this dialogue and move forward, make an impact on the world. So stay tuned, stay subscribed. Cheers.